discussions between Steve Witkoff, the president's envoy on this issue, and his counterpart and counterparts in the Russian government. So we have a pretty good idea of the genesis of this specific 28-point plan. But the basic idea of this plan has been on the table for a number of years, but it hasn't been agreed by the United States beforehand. In other words, the framework for reaching peace in Ukraine has been clear for a long time. There actually was a peace agreement nearly signed between Russia and Ukraine in April 2022, and the United States rushed in, this is during the Biden administration, and told the Ukrainians, don't sign, keep fighting. What that agreement in April 2022 said was basically that Ukraine would be neutral and that NATO would not enlarge to Ukraine. And that was the main issue of this war all along. And that in that context, there could be some territorial changes, maybe de facto, in other words, an agreement that fighting would stop, even if one side or the other didn't accept exactly the territories whose possession would be recognized by the cease of the fighting. In other words, the basic framework for making peace is that Ukraine should be neutral, that it should not be a NATO country. And in that context, after 10 years of war, this has been going on basically since 2014, territories have changed and the fighting would stop and the change of territory would be recognized in a de facto manner. Now, again, the 28-point plan that we've read about in the press states these points pretty straightforwardly, and therefore they're a basis for this war to end. All the warmongers in the United States and in Europe are jumping up and down, saying no, Ukraine should keep fighting, keep losing people, keep suffering territorial losses. And so this warmongering that has been preventing a peace agreement for many years just puts Ukraine in a worse and worse situation. But we haven't had a resolution of the war because we have a lot of warmongers around.
What this reveals is the most painful truth of all. Peace wasn't impossible, it was rejected. The war could have ended years ago, but powerful voices in Washington and Europe chose ideology over lives, turning Ukraine from a nation seeking stability into a battlefield sacrificed for someone else's agenda.
Hope the United States would have the consistency to say that these are the terms that are in America's interest. They are in the interest of Ukraine. They are in the collective security interest of all of the parties, in fact. And that if Zelensky, who is basically a dictator, he rules by martial law, he does not have the backing of the Ukrainian people in any sense who want this war to end. But if the Ukrainian political leadership says they're going to keep on fighting, I hope at least the United States says you're on your own. That's it. No more weapons, no more funding, no more support. You're on your own. Because if Ukraine rejects a peace that is in their interest at a time when they are losing on the battlefield, what's the United States to do? It should not force them to accept, but it should say you're on your own. And that, if Trump has any consistency, which is not be the case, but if he does have any consistency, that would be the right thing to do. The right thing to do from the point of view of America's interests, actually the right thing to do from the point of view of Ukraine's real interest.
This is the uncomfortable crossroads no one in Washington wants to face. If Ukraine refuses a peace that clearly serves its survival, the US has only one responsible option: stop fueling a war that cannot be won. Support can't replace strategy, and at some point telling a partner, you're on your own, isn't abandonment, It's the first honest step toward ending a disaster that should have never reached this point.
The United States is very clear that it's not going to support a continued war. Russia doesn't really fear Ukraine. Russia doesn't want the United States on its border. I don't know exactly what line the Russians would or would not agree to, but the basic cause of this war is that back in the 1990s, actually the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union ended and Russia and Ukraine and the other parts of the Soviet Union became independent states, the United States under Clinton already decided that the U.S. military alliance would expand eastward to Russia's border. These are decisions that go back 30 years. The Russians said that would be a grave national security threat to us and have said that for more than 30 years. The United States ignored that all through this period. Eventually, a war broke out 11 years ago in 2014 over this issue. Until today, the official position of the NATO alliance is that NATO will expand to Ukraine. Trump has said privately and in this document that NATO won't expand to Ukraine. That's how the war could end. But the Europeans are still jumping up and down saying NATO will expand when NATO wants to. And hardliners in the United States say the same thing. And so the basic cause of this war, which goes back 30 years, remains on the table till today. Donald Trump has not proven to be a strong and consequent leader, so he wavers whenever he has objections, even within his own government. Marco Rubio is clearly a much greater hardliner on this issue. Trump doesn't like that kind of opposition, and he's easily pushed over. Whether he will be again is, I guess, a basic question that we're facing.
So
this conflict didn't appear out of nowhere. It sets the result of 30 years of ignored warnings. Russia kept saying NATO on its border was unacceptable, and Washington kept pushing anyway. Until the U.S. faces that reality, peace will stay out of reach.
Out the estimated 2 million Ukrainians who have died or been gravely wounded in this absolutely disastrous and futile and unnecessary war. I find Zelensky absolutely terrible and have found him such for years, delusional or for whatever reason, not counting the terrible, unbelievable costs to his own countrymen, not representing them. And till this day, I find the decisions absolutely awful. He is ruling by decree. He is ruling over and part of a massive corruption scandal. So was a lot of money being made on this war by Zelensky and his henchmen. There's nothing admirable about this agony that he's expressing. If he were a serious and consequent and honest leader, the war would end.
It's painful to hear, but impossible to ignore. Millions of Ukrainians have suffered, while their own leader refuses the one thing that could save them: peace. When a government rules by decree, swims in corruption, and sends its people to die for a war, it cannot win. That's not leadership. That's betrayal.
There's so much wrong with every sentence that she uttered. Borders are inviolable until Europe and the United States decide they're not inviolable. You know, back in the end of the 1990s, the U.S. and Europe bombed Serbia for 78 days to break that country in two. and the breakaway part, Kosovo, that is a border change of this supposedly inviolable borders of Europe, that country, or that breakaway part was then recognized as a nation by the European countries, and NATO put its largest military base in southeastern Europe in that breakaway place. And so these statements are vacuous. Borders can't change except when we want to change them. Van der Leyen has not engaged in any diplomacy. The European Union has not engaged in any diplomacy with Russia whatsoever. They've had no direct talks. They don't believe in diplomacy. There is a slight nuance that should be noted, though, when she talked about Ukraine gets the right to choose. Nobody, including Russia or the U.S. in this 28-point plan, or anybody else, has denied Ukraine's right to become part of the European Union. In fact, this is an issue about military alliances, and this is an issue about NATO, that is the U.S.-led alliance in Ukraine. So Van der Leyen didn't quite say that NATO would be part of Ukraine. There's no clarity in her words. It's empty rhetoric.
It's the hypocrisy that stands out most. Europe preaches that borders are sacred until the moment it wants to redraw them itself. From Kosovo to countless other interventions, the West has never hesitated to change borders by force. Yet suddenly, when diplomacy is needed, they pretend the rules are absolute. And with leaders like von der Leyen offering slogans instead of solutions, Europe isn't leading, it's drifting.